Does my mic sound nice? Check 1, check 2. Everybody make great party people coming through. How are we doing, Sylvia? What's going on, Bert? Frank, I hope you're all good. I think I've gone live a bit preemptively, but you know what? We manage. There's always going to be timing differences. I will go for circa 40 minutes here because the missus has got a fingernails appointment, whatever that means. But there are some things that we have to talk to pre-Austin, the weekend of the US Grand Prix, another sprint race weekend, which is techie. Every time, sprint race weekend is one of the most polarizing things in the F1 space, isn't it? You either love it or you hate it. There is no in between, unlike anything else in the F1 space, of course. It's not like anything else is as controversial or polemic, but what's going on? Fingernail appointments and all that. Don't mind me, it's very cold. Cost of living crisis and all that. We've got to stay warm, haven't we? Go on then, let's talk to some F1. Austin Grand Prix, worthy of note as far as things that you need to consider. Would get the times up, but I think you guys know when they kick off. 7 p.m. is lights out on the Sunday. That's British Standard Time. 2 p.m. American time. That's going to be a bit techie. Due to be on the last lap with my guy Tomo and Baxty and Niran this weekend for the watch along. So do be sure to check that out. As far as themes for the Grand Prix, what do you want to consider? So let's consider the characteristics, the nature of the track. Of course, it's going to be fairly warm. Expect it to be so at the very least. I'm hearing that Saturday for qualifying temperatures might be cooler, so the teams are going to have to contend with those. Max Verstappen is a red hot favourite again to nail the 34th Red Bull win in 40 races. I mean, I can't disagree that that's an overwhelming favourite. Ridiculous odds there from the experts. But who would I be to disagree at this point? Max Verstappen is batting 1,000. He has a hot hand, does the Dutch fella? And I'm not going to be the one to back against him at this point. You having a laugh? Max Verstappen, okay. Setups are going to be critical. Mercedes are bringing a new floor, apparently, that have got many aficionados, broadcasters and F1 commentators hot on Mercedes. What I'm hearing, though, is that floor isn't necessarily for improvements in season. That floor is them getting their forward-thinking cap on and them testing the line of travel, the correct line of travel as far as their design philosophy for next year. And this is what they need to do, right? They need to understand by trial and error, by diagnosis, by exclusion. Shout out my guy Shez and the clinicians out there. They need to exclude all the wrong ways as far as what way they need to go for their future design philosophy, if that makes sense. I feel like I've butchered that. You have very many, or at least initially, they had a very many different ways that they could go in terms of their design philosophy, their concept going forward. You need to exclude all of the wrong ones, right? And by default, that will end you up on the pole sitter, the quickest design concept. And that's what they're doing by bringing this new floor to Austin. It's not 4 race wins. That's beyond now. Although Lewis Hamilton is competing for a second place in the championship, the vice championship as they call it, which is techie, isn't it? We'll get onto that shortly when we talk about Sergio Perez. Here's what you need to know for the upcoming weekend. I'm seeing a divergence in setups. So, from memory, Mercedes has gone for a high downforce setup or higher downforce setup. You can tell by their rear wing. When you look at their wing, the angle gives you all that you need to know as far as whether it's high, medium or low downforce. Around a track like Monza, of course, they all go low downforce, right? Because something like 65 to 70% of that lap is taken full throttle. It's a little bit different around Qatar. It's very stop-starty, but stop-starty in a different way from, I don't know, a Qatar, say, or a Singapore. Stop-starty in that the stops are hard stops, right? So there are long straights and hard stops, hairpin S-turns where the minimum speed is super, super low. So that will suit then the handling dynamic of a Ferrari. The SF175 is very good on straights and very good at stopping in a straight line. Not so good at stopping on a, I don't know, Maggots or Beckett's at Silverstone. Flowy turns, do over a Ferrari. That's not where it's at its best. But around a Qatar, long straights, hard stops, slow minimum speed turns. Cue Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc could go well around here, but I find that interesting. Again, I only say that to say that Red Bull, Mercedes, high downforce setups, Ferrari, medium to high downforce. Very, very interesting the way that these guys are divergent in their setups now. It's gonna be good. Gonna be good. Again, around a track like this, I'm not gonna be the fool that backs against Red Bull. I'm just not. What's going on, you guys who are just jumping in? I know it's early for you guys across that side of the pond, transatlantic settings, but I wanted to get one out, a cheeky one out, and I wouldn't have another time slot, sadly. Okay, cool. So we've done Qatar, Max Verstappen, red hot favourite. Let's talk about Checo Perez, because there's a lot going on around Checo Perez in his fight for that second place in the championship. So the rumour mill, of course, and you guys will have all heard this, is that Checo Perez is potentially going to retire after this season. Should he not get second place? There are loads of tangents and different ways that we can take this conversation. I don't think that's overly harsh. And I know Checo Perez hasn't been his brilliant best this season, in no small part due to Helmut Marko's comments, the pressure from Max Verstappen, the handling dynamic and the way in which they've developed the RB19. He has had a lot to contend with, has Checo Perez. But here is the bottom line. He hasn't been anywhere as good as we know he can be, right? And if there's one thing that Red Bull do not like and won't stand for, underperformance. Especially as they realise this year has been a year where there has been no challenge for first place. The constructors and the drivers wrapped up, done, gonzo. To say that there has been competition is fugazi, fairy dust, because there hasn't been. And that's all well and good having a guy that's underperforming the RB19 in that year. However, next year, when the anticipation, the hope for millions of F1, the millions and millions of F1 fans around the world, is that there will be closer competition for the first place in the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championship, with McLaren sniffing around, with hopefully Mercedes having sorted out themselves and now sniffing around for 25 points every single race weekend. The competition at the top end of the grid, hopefully, touch wood, will be closer. And so they can't afford for Checo Perez to still be sat in that RB19 or RB20 as they'll call it next year. It just can't. It's unacceptable. They can't afford for that to ensue. So what are they going to do? The rumour mill says if he doesn't get P2 this year, then next year Danny Rick might be the guy. Oh, how techie is that? How techie is that? Let me invert that argument ever so slightly, succinctly. Here's what I will say. I don't want to be too down on Checo Perez yet again, because it's easy to talk underperformance, right? That's the low-hanging journalistic trope. Here's what I will say. Lewis Hamilton in that very dodgy dog of a Mercedes car, if he gets P2, bloody Nora, is that not one of his best performances ever in terms of outperforming a dodgy piece of machinery? Bloody Nora. I think that's something to write home about. If after Abu Dhabi 21 and then getting beat by George and having to wrestle with a car that cannot stop porpoising, if then Lewis Hamilton goes and nails P2, becomes super or vice champion, holy shoot, that's chaos. Yeah, but I think he might be gone, you know. I think Checo might be gone. And I love Checo to bits, yeah. But the more that you hear about, the more that you do a deep dive into his performance, and I will say, I don't want to fat shame because that's not acceptable. But F1 drivers are supposed to be like the best of the best, right, in terms of the athletes. And Checo Perez, for the longest time, when you compare and contrast him to his rivals, Max Verstappen as lean as a beanpole, Lewis similarly, you always see the bloody pictures of him on Instagram. George Russell, again, him being one of the tallest on the grid, has to be super lean. Checo Perez just isn't that lean, and maybe he'd argue that he doesn't have to be because he's shorter than the rest, right? But surely that's an opportunity to take advantage of lesser weight. I don't know. I'm talking out my nose here. I don't know. He's got to have a think. If as he says, and again, it's worth mentioning this, Checo Perez has said there is nothing to these rumours, that he intends to continue on at Red Bull, hopefully, and that's got to be worth something, eh? But if you're going to take these rumour at face value, I don't think Christian Horner wants him there. I don't think Marko wants him there. And I don't think Christian Horner wants him there either, which segues very nicely to our second topic of the day. Apparently, there is a rift between Helmut Marko and between his mate, team principal Christian Horner. I don't think they're big fans of each other anymore, are they? And the genesis story of this is, of course, Dietrich Mateschitz, the founder of Red Bull, their talisman as far as everything managerial at Red Bull Sports Group. Sadly passed away last year, right? And Dietrich's guy was always Helmut Marko. They I don't want to say they grew up together, but they go way back, right, as far as the relationship. Now that Dietrich's no longer around, and that Helmut Marko is, at times, a bit of a liability as far as Red Bull's PR is concerned, Christian Horner doesn't want him around, right? Christian Horner doesn't want to answer for Helmut Marko, talking all of this xenophobic, racism, stereotypical stuff around his driver, Checo Perez. Christian Horner wants to focus on what could hopefully be a very tight, contentious, polemic battle for the ages that is the 2024 F1 season. He doesn't have time to be quarterbacking, to be mopping up for Helmut Marko's as a senior executive at Red Bull Racing, or Red Bull Group even. He doesn't want to have to be mopping up for his nonsense. He doesn't have bandwidth. So I see why this rift has come apart. The only issue here, though, is that Max Verstappen is also a Helmut Marko guy. He's come out very openly and given his backing to Helmut, and that makes Christian Horner's position in trying to gently and tactfully usher out the door Helmut Marko. How do you balance those conflicting demands? How do you prioritise stakeholder expectations when they want different things? I don't know. Keep your eyes peeled to that one, I'm telling you, because that could get very, very techie. Over to you, Christian Horner. The difficulty that he's got there is not dissimilar to the difficulty that Toto Wolff has in balancing the conflicting priorities, the conflicting demands of stakeholders, Messrs, Russell and Hamilton. Oh, it's going to be techie. SHT. Perez is a decent Formula One driver this year. He's just so hard to watch him. Yeah, ever since Monaco. I think that was the inflection point. I've got a video coming out later on this afternoon that talks about all that stuff. I will get to questions, peddlers, I promise. I will get to questions, but there's a couple of things that I want to rinse through before then. Should we have a look at this? Oh, God. Let me bring this higher. Oh, my gosh. Right. So Lance Stroll, we all know, has had an absolute nightmare of late, right? Not been the same since the summer break. Four consecutive DNFs. 4 consecutive races he hasn't gotten through to Q3. Like, what's that about? In that car is good enough to get into Q3, even out of Q1, I think that is, sorry. He's been underperforming the car in a nutshell. And then we see this F1 poster where Felipe Drugovich has replaced Lance Stroll. Now the F1 Reddit and F1 Twitter sphere went bonkers and extrapolated this out to mean that Lance Stroll won't be racing at America. Aston Martin disagree. They've come out and said, no, that's not true. Lance will be there. But is this indicative of something that could happen in the short to medium term? Who knows? And again, this goes back to Papa Stroll, right? Lawrence Stroll, and what his intentions will be. His loyalty is his son. He bought the team so that his son could have a seat, right? To take him out of the doldrums that were Williams. But I mean, how long can he, as the team principal, as the owner of Aston Martin, how long can Lawrence continue to throw good money after bad? That's the question that he needs to ask himself. That's the question. And especially when Lance is starting to, he's not towing. At the very least, you've got to toe the party line as far as the baseline hygiene factors. Don't get violent with your trainer in the bloody garage when he's telling you to go to the front of the garage, because that's what the rules and regulations say that you must do. Don't get physical with your trainer when he's telling you not to throw the bloody 20 grand's worth of steering wheel outside the car. Like, that's not on. That's not acceptable, even if you are the son of the owner. Particularly if you are the son of the owner. That's not on. So I'll be interested. Stay tuned to see where this Lance Stroll story arc goes. I'm telling you, it's techie. And I say all that with this in mind. This was never Lance's dream. This was Lawrence's dream, right? Lance wanted to be a tennis player and go and kiki with Jocko and Nadal and the Federers of this world. This wasn't his dream. This was more his dad's dream. So now we have a dilemma on our hands, right? It is very techie. Yeah, Sylvia, no, you can't be putting your hands on people, man. That's like, that's the lowest level of disrespect. What, in an F1 garage with billions on the line and commercial value at stake, sponsorship there too. Like, yeah, you can't. I don't think Lawrence would have been too pleased at that. Yeah. He does look looks a bit forlorn, doesn't he, Foster? He doesn't look in his, in a great state. And that's never good to see, right? You don't like to see that. I mean, he's one of 20. There is a lot to be grateful for if you are Lance Stroll. I heard on a podcast recently that he's never smacked of entitlement as Lance, and that's been a positive for him. But now it's time to roll up his sleeves, chap, and show and prove, because there's a gazillion people waiting in the wings who will take that seat off your hands happily. Liam Lawson, mention no names. Drogovic, mention no names. It's very, very techie. Go on then, peddlers. So that's Lance. Let me show you this very quickly. This is very sick. So you know that USA, much like Suzuka, is one of those races where they tinker with their marketing spiel. You'll see that Red Bull have a very different livery to celebrate the USA Grand Prix. Yuki Tsunoda, this is what he's bringing. What a helmet. Again, smacking of the leather cowboy material that they wear for their hats. I'm loving that, man. Yuki Tsunoda, take a bow, sir. Mr. Danny Rick is back in the fold after having broken his arm, I think. It feels a bit soon, you know. I heard him talking at the press conference that there were complications. He'd broken it worse than they thought that he'd broken it, and they flew him out to Spain to get it mended and healed for. You know, I will say this. I'm very, very glad to see Danny Rick back in the car, because there was talk. Listen, Liam Lawson had not underperformed that AlphaTauri, and there was talk of him being a permanent fixture in that Danny Rick seat. I am glad to see Danny Rick back in that seat then. I wouldn't have wanted him to see. I wouldn't have wanted to see him go out like this. I will say it that way. He's only just got back in the car, right? He's only had 3 drives. That wouldn't be fair. And I'm glad that Red Bull, the parent company of AlphaTauri, have given that opportunity back to Danny Rick, because potentially that second seat in Red Bull for 2024 is what's at stake here. Go for it, Danny Rick. And who doesn't enjoy Danny Rick's presence on the grid? Always smiling, always bouncing around and cracking jokes, full of bants. And the F1 grid, the paddock needs more of that, surely. Surely, because it's boring otherwise. These guys, I don't know, these cookie cutter personalities, I've had enough of that, man. You need to... The guy who put F1 kicking and screaming on his shoulders, fire Drive to Survive season 1 and 2, when nobody else wanted to spend their time participating because it was an experiment. What was the upside? Man, F1 owes him a debt of gratitude. Absolutely. Give that dude a seat, man. I would love to see him in that car next to Max Verstappen, the rematch that no one wants to see. Oh, gosh. Jackie, this is where the points are after Qatar. Max Verstappen still down the road. Okay, so I'm doubling back here. But again, I think this is worthy of note. 209 points. Oh, so this is the points difference between the team. At 209 points is the difference between Checo Perez. Only to underline the point that I made earlier, the extent to which Checo Perez is underperforming this car is unacceptable. If this continues and he doesn't secure P2 in the championship this year, Checo Perez's place in Red Bull in that team is untenable, simply put. Should we have a chat about conditions? In fact, let me talk about Lewis Hamilton very quickly. I don't want to relitigate for what we've already talked about. Right, here's what's happened with Lewis. Take a sip of that drink, Cameron, before we get to you, Techie. 38 of you watching concurrently. Great for ad infinitum each and every single time to each and every single one of you. Here's what I'm going to say about Lewis Hamilton's circumstance, yeah. And you guys will have seen the clip that went viral. Bless up to Nasher of Quick Stop F1. I was on there earlier in the week talking all sorts of shenanigans. I can't even redo the emotional trauma of talking through this because it's too heavy a burden for my shoulders to endure. Okay, for those of you who've been hiding under a rock for the past 7 days, here's what's happened. The FIA have come out and said something to the effect of Lewis Hamilton is a role model, whereas before, for Max Verstappen's incidents, he's very... there were a couple of incursions, a couple of races back, impeding in qualifying, as an example, Yuki Tsunoda, I think it was. The angle that the FIA took on those indiscretions, the Max Verstappen ones a couple of races ago, said, you know what, we've noted it. We're not going to reopen nor relitigate because we're one race on now. There were 3 of them. We made a mistake. Cool. With Lewis Hamilton, and they've taken a different tact. They've looked. They said that they were. I think things are changing as we speak, to be fair. But they said they were going to re-look at the Qatar incident, where not the incident itself with George Russell and Lewis, but they were going to look. What they were going to look at was Lewis's crossing of the track, because that was dangerous and that's against the rules. Again, you'll all remember Tom Price's fatal incident where there were stewards crossing a track and what happened, right? It is, of course, dangerous to cross a racing track and strictly prohibited. But the rancor, what incurred the wrath of millions of Lewis Hamilton fans around the world, was the wording of the FIA statement, which went something to the effect of, we're treating Lewis Hamilton differently because he's a role model. He's a role model, hence we have to look at this differently. I understand what they wanted to say. Lewis too, because he's come out in the press conference and said, listen, we had a chat. I understand what they were meaning. I'm a role model. We're all role models. And so we need to treat indiscretions, infringements of the regulations very, very harshly. If that's what Lewis is taken from it, then I'm not gonna be outraged vicariously on behalf of Lewis Hamilton, because that's doing Lewis Hamilton a disservice. That's not my bag. That's not what I'm here to do. However, initially I was raging. How are you gonna? I want to make it clear, right? I watch a lot of sports. Rules and regulations in any sports, it's key. Their foundation, as their capstone, you've got to. They need to be clearly written, and they need to be implemented consistently and transparently across the board. all the time, consistently for all the participants of that sport. Because otherwise it's not a sport, right? Otherwise it's just it's the WWE. This is sports entertainment. For new fans to take F1 seriously, and there are a lot of them, right? 25% of all fans watching now, or last year at the very least, 25% have come into the sport brand new, fresh from Drive to Survive. If you're going to keep those fans engaged, it needs to be easier, at least, for them to understand the way in which the rules are applied. And if you're doing this well, Lewis Hamilton is a role model thing, so, and he needs to be, judged more harshly, or the rules need to be applied more stringently to him than others. That's that's chaos. That is like, what do you mean? How and why FIA? If that's what they were saying. So Lucy's saying that's not what they were saying. And he's had a meeting with them since and he's all clear. But the reaction this time last weekend, in fact, I think the release dropped on. So Saturday last weekend, when this news dropped and that statement was released, the reaction was a function of, well, rules are rules. Rules are rules. Institute them properly and consistently. FFS, FIA. Like, is that what we're doing? It can't be that. It can't be that. But you know what? The goalposts have shifted. If Lewis isn't outraged, I'm not going to be the bud. I'm not going to be the crazy Lewis Hamilton fan to be outraged on his behalf when he's not. I'm not going to overtype somebody else's emotions, because that's the commoditization of the athlete, and we're not going to do that on this channel. Not on this channel. Not on this channel. But Lewis has said this since. And this, in response to Martin Brundle, again, there was a furore on the back. We're still doing the Qatar Grand Prix debrief. It's late, isn't it? It's meant to be Austin, but this is relevant, right? I think F1, and I'll go another 20 minutes, guys, and then my missus I need to go and take over on daddy duty. Martin Brundle said something to the effect of, when the conditions are as difficult as they were at Qatar, this is when F1 drivers make heroes of themselves. And if they don't want the job, step aside and somebody else will take it. I get why Martin was talking that way. It's a function of the generation from which he was born, right? The generation in which he drove F1 cars, where deaths were far more frequent than they are as at October 2023. However, Lewis has said, obviously I didn't do it in the race, didn't get to feel the pain. Lewis has agreed. I'm not even going to read out the entire statement because that's long, but Lewis has pretty much agreed with what Martin said. This is an extreme sport and we are paid very highly to do what we're doing. From my perspective, when I've not been feeling great at the end of the race, I've just got to train harder, and that's how it's been for me. Back in the Senna days, you go over the curb, it's grass. Okay, so I hear what he's saying. I hear what Lewis is saying. But he wasn't saying that when his back was hurting from the poor pussy. But I digress. I don't want to pick holes and inconsistency in Lewis Hamilton's statement, because I agree with what he's said. Broadly, we can't make this sport safe enough, right? We don't want to see serious injuries, and we definitely don't want to see deaths. If Lance Stroll and Logan Sargent are in the car talking about they're nearly passing out mid-corner, that's dangerous, and we can't afford for that to happen going forward. Here's what the action plan is, FIA. Here's what we do going forward. Going forward, we don't do Qatar in October. Got to do it later for the same reason why we had a Winter World Cup, right? You got to do it later in the year. In October, Qatar is too hot for there to be a Grand Prix. The sort of extreme conditions we're talking about is drivers pushing themselves in the car, not having to deal with inhospitable working conditions. Like, what do we do? Like, what is this? Is this 2023 or like 1923? Like, what are we doing? It's not that. That's not. This isn't an Iron Man. This isn't the type of extreme conditions that these guys should need to deal with. We're talking about extreme G, right? The speed is always going to be extreme. Those are the extremities that F1 drivers need to contend with. Not bloody boiling hot conditions in the car, or not being able to, like, I don't know, not having sufficient air in and around the cockpit for these lot to breathe. This isn't that. These guys aren't going to see the tyre. It's a different type of extremity, and I just want to be clear around that. Whilst I don't disagree with Lewis and Brundle's statement, I think it's important that we focus, we zoom focus the lens on what sort of extremity we understand that these guys need to contend with. It isn't supposed to be boiling hot in the cockpit. Fainting in the car is dangerous. That's not it. That isn't it. Right, guys, I'll get to your questions now. Sylvia, Dwayne, what's Dwayne say? It's Circus who does their PR. The FIA needs to clear this up, not Lewis Hamilton. So, oh God, you're not wrong, Dwayne. You're not wrong. Yeah, penalise them $1 million as well. Bloody no. Okay, to that point, which I missed off my agenda, the fines have gone up. The maximum fine that the FIA can penalise 20 drivers currently on the F1 circuit, or the F1 grid even, $1 million. Chaos. I think that's primarily in response to Lewis Hamilton traversing the track, you know. Listen, none of them are ever going to go poor. Okay, listen, I'll say this. Some of the other drivers who are less well paid, like I was going to say Danny Rick, but that's not true. Like your Yukis, probably on a couple of million a year. If he gets fined $1 million, that's going to hit his purse, right? I suppose, I don't hate it. The drivers are never going to like it, right? Taking monies out their pockets, but I don't hate it. What it's there for is to be a deterrent from, the drivers potentially taking risks with their life by crossing the track at the wrong time. I don't hate it in theory, but what I dislike is their mismanagement of the PR message. I mean, it read like they were victimising Lewis Hamilton. Why ever they would do that? Oh dear, rhetorical question. The only one in F1, the biggest asset in F1, I don't know. And when I say biggest asset, here's what I mean by that. Sports Pro Media have done a chart, a bit of a deep dive on the most marketable athletes in all of sport. Number 7 on that list was Lewis Hamilton. Number 10 on that list was Dutchman, current reigning world champion Max Verstappen. So why then disenfranchise this fella? Why victimise him? Why make an example out of him? Again, the flip argument is that if anyone you were going to make, if you're looking to institute the rules across the board and deter the others from not making similar mistakes, not traversing the track under racing conditions, then maybe you do want to make an example out of the biggest and baddest. I don't know. Musa, Cam, what do you think will happen if Lawson was given Perez's seat and actually annihilated Max? Musa, you're reaching there, bro. I mean, who... The crux of your question is who can beat Max? I don't think it's Lawson's job. I think if anybody is there to be, and it's a big bloody if at this point, because you know what I think of Max Verstappen, and the dude's only getting better. Suzuka, Monaco, Jeddah, making less mistakes, more mature, reading the race in real time, like a Fernando Alonso does in his pomp. He's only getting better as Max Verstappen. So I don't see anybody outside Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, if I'm honest. Maybe Charles Leclerc with a bit more mature. Charles Leclerc has the pace, but we know that pace, it's not pace alone that wins championships, right? You're going to need more than that to beat Max Verstappen. You're going to need a bit of good fortune. You're going to need a car that's at least as quick as that Red Bull. You're going to need smart, race savvy, race restarts, strategy, the ability to read a race in real time. I don't think Lawson has that. Not yet. Maybe at some point in the future. Lewis probably still has that. Fernando Alonso probably still. Leclerc probably at some point will have that, but I don't know. It's getting techie, isn't it? Piastri. Yeah, you know what, Sylvie, you say Piastri there. He's coming on, isn't he? He's still got something. There's still something to be said for his race pace or lack thereof as versus Lando Norris. I'm keen to see how that develops. But again, he's continuously developing, right? This is his first year, remember. And a first year after a sabbatical, by the way. Hitherto, before this year, he hadn't driven for 2 years, right? He'd been on the bench at Alpine. For him to come in and bang out performances, particularly at Qatar, where he hadn't driven before, like Suzuka, I think that was his first time around there. Piastri's absolutely impressed me. I cannot lie, guys, but that's a story being written still, isn't it? It is still being written. It's one in progress. Right, but let me see. Quadrupled fines. Charles Leclerc's 100th Grand Prix, again, worthy of note. So I suppose I only say that to say that we are in not quite a golden era yet, but there are loads of drivers who are nearly there, right? Lando, Piastri, Leclerc, George Russell. They're all not quite on Max's level, but they're getting there, right? And so I think this is to be, I just really want these guys. McLaren are taking steps in the right direction as far as putting together a package capable of challenging for a championship over the course of 24 races. And I'm not mad at that. I love that, in fact. But you just kind of need Mercedes to do the same. Ferrari need to be pulling in the same direction. And to that point, you guys might have seen news of a conversation that Eddie Jordan has had with Adrian Newey. And it's techie. Now, I don't want to pour water on all our hopes of a competitive championship in the 2024 season. But Adrian Newey has said something to this effect. No chance. If you are only watching F1 because you expect another team to challenge us next year, then don't bother. Don't hold your breath. And I get why he said that, right? Because all this time, listen, their championship, in effect, has been wrapped up for a good few races now. So what do you think Red Bull have been doing, if not focusing on their 2024 car? In theory, at least, if not practice. Doesn't bode well. This development race is a cumulative one now. Gap that you've lost to RB19, to the balls that are red as far as their design philosophy. It's going to be so hard, so difficult, borderline impossible, if not implausible, for the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari and McLaren to bridge that gap to Red Bull. Anytime between now and 2026 when the brand new rules and regs come into play. It's going to be techie. It is going to be techie. Chest pains for Lando, says Musa. And he spoke it. You know what? He didn't even speak about chest pains. Physically, I don't think is Lando's issue as far as Oscar Piastri. For him to be talking so openly and transparently about mental health troubles and the stress that Piastri, in him coming to the team and being so fast, so quickly, so instantly pretty much, is a bit concerning. Feels premature. Imagine if Lando were competing with Oscar Piastri for a championship now. Maybe you want to argue the counterpoint that you almost want Lando to be getting, maybe it's a positive that Lando is having to go through this stress and struggles with mental health as far as having a competitive teammate in the car, in the other car. Maybe it's good that he's going through it now and not next year when they're fighting for a job. I don't know. I have no idea. Musa, Sylvia, gonna get techie though. It is going to get techie. Right, let's get some of your questions. Thank you guys for watching again. Listen, every single time I'm going to try and start doing these a couple of times a week minimum. Friday seems to be a good day, particularly before the next Grand Prix, which I'm hoping is a banger. I'm hoping it will be a banger. But again, Ferrari are going to go well, aren't they? But Max Verstappen in that Red Bull around the track with long straights where you got to jump hard on the brake pedal for a long while. I don't know. You even got to expect Checo to go well around there. I'm not sure. Fool's gold to expect somebody to beat Red Bull, even with the Mercedes new floor and their high downforce wing. I just think it's. I don't want to be too naive about this thing. As much as I would kill for a competitive race this week. Who knows? Who knows? Right, let me get into the community tab. Guys, every time I do one of these, 24 hours before, jump onto the community tab of the mothership channel, Cameron F1, and this one, and get your questions in there. Cameron, I am well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Reliability is a problem and nobody talks about it. Nothing really fails these days. Oh, Cameron, get into the key issues, eh? And when a simulation predicts failure, they simply change the part and get a three-place grid penalty. In the good old days, an engine would blow or something such. So Cameron makes a really good point here, but it's a different era, isn't it? And everything has to evolve. I think it's a bad look when we get too many reliability issues. Cars stopping out on track. Sponsors don't like to see that, do they? But I agree with Cameron. Maybe we've gone a step too far as limiting the downside for poor reliability. In this latest video, when it comes out later on this afternoon, 4 p.m. on the mothership channel, Cameron F1, 10 precise moments when teammates became enemies. I think you'll all like that. But in my research for that video, you guys will remember 2010 to 2013, Sebastian Vettel's reign. Reliability in that Renault engine was always an issue. And ironically, what Cameron's saying there is it's still influencing the shape of F1 history, because Red Bull are super keen to bring their power units in-house, because they're still wounded. They're still too fresh in the memory, the amount of points they lost from the fragilities of that Renault engine between 10 and 13. Cost them, or could have very nearly cost them championships. Oh, you're about the sweetest guy on YouTube, but all you want to do is argue. Listen, all I want to do is argue. That is from Thundernut. Argue. Tactful diplomatic discourse more than argue. I think that's a response to the title post, though, right? I said, let's argue. I mean, who up for a cheeky argument, a back and forth? I would love for two topics to be discussed. One, the recent increase in driver fines, which we've done. Second, more lightly and flaming, Nelson Piquet is the first biracial driver, bloody Nora, to ever win the Drivers' Championship. Despite Piquet's relatively light skin, he's the son of a black woman. I do not know this, Eduardo, that Nelson Piquet is mixed race. That's news to me. Although, having said that, Brazil, if you ever go to Brazil, a lot of the demographic are like a very light-skinned mixed race, right? Much more prevalent than in the UK, as an example. And no strangers to that. Speaking to Mama Cameron, you would not believe, looking at Cameron Jr. is very light-skinned. Like, the world is a large percentage of the world is mixed race. That's what we're dealing with. Hamilton's fault, said Cupid stunt. When is it not Hamilton's fault, Cupid? When is it not? It's always just give it to Lewis, right? Rain on Sunday, give it to Lewis. Lewis's fault. Reliability issues, Mercedes, give it to Lewis. Bad decisions from Mercedes as far as their design philosophy, not Mercedes' fault. Lewis Hamilton's fault. Just give it to it. Blame it on the Lewis Hamilton. The most toxic team in F1 history. Bloody Nora. I think what Jonathan's alluding to there is Red Bull. Are Red Bull the most toxic team in all of F1 history? You know, here's my shout. I think Mercedes, Ron Dennis's Mercedes, in my mind, as I define toxicity, was quite toxic subliminally. And everything was very corporate. It all had to be one way. Adrian Newey couldn't even paint his walls purple. His office walls, it was all very like, maybe controlling more than toxic. But would I argue that Red Bull are more toxic than McLaren? I don't know. It's techie, isn't it? It's all very subjective. 2023 championship crown Tiger says is most boring championship in F1 history. Red Bull have destroyed F1 with their 30 games. Bloody Nora. I don't think it's the most. Okay, so listen, it's not been 2021, eh? It's not been back and forth and blood and guts. It hasn't been. But I mean, Mansell's year wasn't fantastic. There's been some Sebastian Vettel years. I want to say 2012, 2013, quite boring as well. Has this been the most boring year in F1? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'd argue that. It hasn't been blood and guts. This hasn't been 2021 or 2007 or 2012. It hasn't been one of the most fantastic 89 or 90. There hasn't been a fight for first place, has there? And that's sad. But do I blame that on Red Bull? Well, they've got 2 drivers in their team, right? I would blame Checo Perez more than I would blame Red Bull for this. Can you blame the effort? I don't know. Blame is a techie word. Culpability is a very techie word. I'm not sure it's even applicable in this circumstance to that question. But I digress. Right, let me flip across to the other channel. Ricardo says, just because Perez won a race doesn't make him a great driver. Pastor Manod. You know what? I hear what you're saying there. I do hear what you're saying there, Ricardo. But it's not just a race win, right? Turkey 2020, what? Like, you've seen him go back and forth, toe to toe with some of the very good ones, if not great. I mean, my guy Peter Windsor would always argue that the problem with Checo is that his strength is that he's more a defensive driver than an offensive one, right? He's always struggled potentially in coming through the pack, much like Sebastian Vettel used to. If you're trying to come past him, you're going to have a difficult time, as Lewis Hamilton did so frequently in 2020-21. Mention no names, Turkey. Mention no names, Abu Dhabi. But the problem with Checo is that he doesn't have it's not as clinical as Max in the overtake. And that's left him founding. Not to mention the fact that the tyres have come away from him. As a tyre whisperer, degradation is your friend. And if there's less deg for the field to deal with, for the field to contend with, then obviously that's going to work against you. And with the new tyre compounds, Pirelli, they've strengthened them up, have Pirelli. So that's worked against him, sadly, for the Mexican. Marko's comments as well, like, who wants to work in that environment? Not me. Go on then. I am Kang says, I thought Horner and Marko were really close like Toto and Nicky were. I guess that's wrong. Also, I've heard that Max will leave if Marko leaves, which I don't believe. So I think we've addressed that already. Max Verstappen is a Helmut Marko guy. Come out and said that publicly recently. Helmut Marko is my guy, and I'm not having him leaving. So I think the pressure is on Christian to manage that going forward. The old conflicting demands of senior stakeholders. And Max Verstappen will win out in that, ultimately. He will win out. I wouldn't be surprised to see Helmut Marko stay for the foreseeable, if not because Max is in favour of it. Techie. Very techie, that. Good luck, Christian. Hi, Cameron. Says Frank, even though I can understand why... Is this you, Frank? Is this the same Frank? Even though I can understand why this is part of the modern times, F1 talk about... Okay, so I think Frank's saying that Frank's not interested in the gossip. But you know what? This is... I watched Misfits Boxing last week. Logan Paul versus Dylan Dennis and KSI versus Tommy Fury. I am a purist. Come in, Rob. Yeah, leave him in front of the TV if you could. I've got to go. That's me looking to get Anne divorced. Where was I? Right, gossip era. Watch Misfit Boxing last week. Logan Paul versus Dylan Dennis. KSI versus Tommy Fury. In this social media era, boxing is evolving because the viewing patterns of the viewing public are also evolving. TikTok is a real thing that tries to capture these guys and girls younger than greybeard over here, who have very short attention spans, right? That's the truth. And Misfits Boxing is plugging that attention span gap it is. F1 needs to do the same. And whether that's, okay, so I'm not loving it if it's gossip, folks, and, Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. Beef between Russell and Lewis always. Role model Lewis Hamilton. We're going to treat him. I'm not feeling that. But it is a serious thing, and F1 needs to compete accordingly. Peddlers, I'm going to have to run. You guys are absolute legends. Thank you so much. Drop a like if you haven't done already. Subscribe to the channel. There will be a video out later on the Mothership channel, and it is really good. Please watch it and share that. 74 of you watching concurrently, and I'm grateful ad infinitum to each and every single one of you. Do me a favour, like, subscribe, enjoy the racing this weekend, hug somebody that you love, and between now and next time, remember, as always, to look but never stare.